The sycamore trees in the dark trees that blow.
And welcome to Twin Peaks Unwrapped. I'm your host, Ben Durant, and beside me is
Bryon Kazaska.
Hi, Bryon.
Hey, Ben. How are you?
I am great. We've gotten through our Mark Frost coverage. I could probably spend weeks on it, but I think we've gotten a few weeks of talking about Mark Frost, and it's time to talk about some other things.
We are so lucky, and we were lucky many fronts when it came to Mark Frost and the new book. And in 2018, we're going to deep dive more into season 3. We're going to deep dive more into the book, but we appreciate everybody who's come on and talked about our first impressions of the book.
Yes.
So it's been really awesome. But we're gonna be diving into some David Lynch short films in the next month during the holidays.
Yes.
But this week, the week of Thanksgiving, we felt it would be great to have a friend of the podcast who hasn't been on probably since the beginning of season 3.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what
we had him on. We separated his interview into 3 parts. Remember that? That was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. We're on the phone with Andreas. How are you, Andreas?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. So before, with so much to talk about, I know there's so many things you've been involved with, but since we haven't talked to you since the show was ended, what did you think of the return of Twin Peaks, the ending? What do you make of it all?
Well, I think it was a mind-boggling, mind-blowing
Yeah.
show, all of it. Certain parts of it, I think, are just staggering. The sort of Stanley Kubrick, Stan Brakhage-like shots in part 8 that many people have talked about. That explosion, that lengthy montage is just incredible. That you'd ever see that in. I know we're not actually watching it on television, but then in sort of a streaming landscape is still pretty incredible, I think.
It is.
And other parts of it too, are very staggering. It looks to me more like, and I know that Mark Frost is very involved with it, so it's not in any way to undermine his role, but it looks to me more like a sort of a Lynch magnum opus than it does the original Twin Peaks. But I quite liked it. I quite like it on its own, and I think it did what Fire Walk With Me did when that came out, which is to Fire Walk With Me was, as everyone knows, a very divisive film when it came out, and by now it's become accepted as perhaps a canonical film. Film history writers like Mark Cousins have included it in their canons, and it's being hailed as a more or less unacknowledged masterpiece. But the reason why it was divisive, I think, was because it was so different from the original show. It's almost as if there isn't one Twin Peaks. There are different iterations of Twin Peaks, different incarnations of it. And I think that the first shot of Fire Walk With Me, with the television set being destroyed by a blunt object, illustrates that this is not the Twin Peaks that we are accustomed to.
True.
And in the new one, we have the destruction of Laura's photo, I suppose, in a similarly iconoclastic way, telling us that this is not what you would expect it to be. And even the use of black and white in the opening, episode or part, there are elements both sonically and visually that immediately cue you into understanding that if you thought this was going to be like something very similar to the original series, you're going to be taken for a ride, and luckily so. I mean, that's part of what's so great about it. It's not only the fact that we can sort of sit here and continue to debate what actually happened in the ending.
Yeah.
Did he, in fact, manage to change the course of time? Was it, in fact, a time travel story? Was it kind of an Orpheus-like hubristic turn, as Mark Frost has talked about? The Paladins' attempt to change the history of time, but not really perhaps being able to actually change the course of time? Or was it sort of a more classical Lynchian cyclical thing, telling us indirectly that the more things change, the more they stay the same, with this sampling of Sarah Palmer's voice at the end? One thing, one quality in it is our ability to continually debate it and still not know exactly what it was about. But I think I'm first and foremost, I'm kind of into the visceral, sensual part of Twin Peaks, and I think that there's so much of that in this new series. So I was profoundly happy with it. Also very frustrated in parts, but that's part of the experience of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know you've talked about in the past sound design in some of your essays. I know you've got a book coming up, and I think you've written some in the 25 Years Later site. And it's interesting to look at the return, and you have David Lynch, who is the sound designer, and how much it's used. And I'm sure that's something you'll probably be looking at for years and years to revisit the new series here and how they use sound in it.
Oh, yes. Well, sound has always been a key interest of mine, and I think it's so interesting how much physicality is in the new show. The original series, to me, was more or less, when you think of it sonically, I think you naturally come to think of the music, the sort of the ambient, spherical music in this Julie Cruz-like angelic voice. Yeah. And in the new series, of course, we have some of those leitmotifs, but in many, many parts of the new series, those famous leitmotifs are held back or even withheld. And I think that's part of the sort of the push-pull mechanism that they use in the new series. They give us a little something. They bait us into thinking, okay, well, now I'm venturing into well-known territory, and then they do something else. They sort of make a bait and switch or whatever it's called. Yeah. So we have a few sonic motifs that we know, some light motifs by Badalamenti that are reused from both Fire Walk With Me and the original series. But then we also have like Penderecki's atonal music and this very, very physical music and just the sheer sound of it. Much more, noise and much less music. If we're supposed to, according to Sabrina Sutherland, the executive producer, right, and Dean Hurley, one of the sound creators on the new show, this change was there for a reason. The original show had sort of a wall-to-wall, almost Congolian-like use of music all the time, and I think many people came to like that. But according to Sutherland, I think that was kind of an interesting point she made when I discussed the new series with her. This was, in fact, sort of a shorthand for many of the other directors that came in. So if they wanted to make it Lynchian or Peaksy, they could, I could just grab some Badalamenti stuck music in a way, and and add one of those leitmotifs that we all like, and that would immediately, like the finger snapping jazz, and the whiskers, or the bass and stuff like that, and we would immediately be entering Peaks or be entering Lynchland, and so that wasn't ever Lynch's intention that it to be this heavily musical. So that's, I suppose, why the new one is much more physical, much less musical. And when it's musical in a different way, either directly, sampling elements from the original series, reusing scenes and songs from the original series as the Just You scene, right? Yeah. or employing different songs and different for different reasons. We have these strangely extra diegetic songs at the Roadhouse, all of which were recorded in one day, and then we have these different tracks, popular tracks, Charmaine and Otis Redding and stuff like that, used either to create sort of a nostalgic vibe, as in the case of Otis Redding, or to create this kind of counterpoint, as when Charmaine is used when Johnny is forced to witness Sylvia being battered by Richard, right? In that very uncanny scene where we have his teddy bears asking him whether he's okay or something like it. Like,
what do you say? How are you, Johnny?
Yeah,
that's great. It's funny though. Like,
how are you today, John?
Yeah, it's funny that the original series with the Red Room sequence, and you have the little man, and he says, "There's always music in the air." And then a few episodes later, you have the record player going in the Jock's cabin, and so there's this idea: there's always music in the air. And yet we have this new series that there's a very limited amount. And you're right, Andreas, that it was these directors that were trying to imitate Lynch, and yet Lynch didn't want to do music, a whole bed of music. But it's funny, these other people thought that if they used more of his type of music, Badalamenti music, that it would be more Lynch-like. But it's weird in a way. It's still very strange, this series, without so much music, because that's what we're used to now.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it in a way, that was part of what felt strange to me. I remember. But I like that strange feeling. And I think I wrote in an article back in May. That was at the end of May, so we were like 4 episodes in or something like it, or parts, I should say. I wrote about the sort of Viktor Skrovsky, a Russian formalist, who said that the purpose of art is to make the stone stony, is to sort of instill a sensation of things as they, not as we think of them, but as they are physically and actually visually and orally perceived. So, and I think that's what, in a way, what Lynch does, is that he forces us to see things in a new way and to hear things in a new way. If we actually listen to the sounds, as we are told, if we actually look at the visuals, things seem different to us. I remember sitting in a panel in Denmark and being ridiculed for noting that the colors are slightly different. Sort of the color palette is slightly different. So even the reds are slightly more purple or slightly more mauve in the new series, and there's a sort of a different kind of tone, both in terms of color palette and in terms of the sound and the music. So it is as if we are back in Twin Peaks, but not really. I think that, I don't know that was intentional. I don't know that was the point behind it, and Lynch wouldn't ever say. But for me, that made total sense, because here we are as fans yearning to go back with a definite fear of letting go, and we are forced back to something, and it's not really the same. Buildings have changed. We are in new locations. The colors have changed. The soundscape is different. Some characters have changed quite dramatically. Other characters have been pushed totally to the periphery, like Wyndham Earle. And some for good reasons, of course, and some characters have entered the play without us ever having heard of them before. So, and in a way, it's as if we are trying to go back to a target that's moving, and I like that idea of it.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's as if it plays on our yearning and our longing and our nostalgia, and it does that in sort of a push-pull way. So it gives us a little something, but then it pulls the rug from underneath us. So we are eagerly awaiting some of those classical leitmotifs. Oh, give us a little bit more falling, or whatever it might be, or the world spins. And then when finally we get what the world spins, it's sort of a very short version of it.
Yeah.
And instead we get like just you in a lengthy, 1-to-1 re-sampling of the original track. One of the most divisive, if not maligned, scenes of the original series. I just love it. It is as if they're kind of toying with us, and
it is.
So I like the fact that it didn't give me what I thought I wanted.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's you love that. I mean, it's
Fair
frustrating and sometimes it makes me angry, but at the same time, I love it that it's different. It gives you something,
something different.
So, Andreas, recently you did an article for 25 Years Later site.com, My Dog Barks Some. Can you share a little bit about that article that you wrote for them?
Some time ago, I read it. I've been into Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, for quite some time. I've always found his work interesting. It's not that I agree with everything he says, but parts of what he writes are very interesting. And he has this, I suppose it's almost sort of a Freudian motif. He writes about ascetic cultures and the ascetic moral, and how some people back in the day, like some Catholics and some ascetic people, they tried very vehemently to sort of lock, in a metaphorical sense, the dogs in the basement. So, all those primal urges, they wanted to lock those away and never to see it. And one way in which he saw that, Nietzsche, was that there were cultures where the way in which if you were very religious, devoutly religious, if you wanted to sort of punish somebody for sodomy, you would do it by, putting something, forcing something up inside their rectum, which is in itself strangely perverted, right? So it's as if, the way you punish sodomy, in fact, when you've tried to sort of keep the primal elements down for a long, long time, perhaps they come back in sort of a perverted form. That's his point. So he has this image of dogs barking in the basement, and you try to lock them in the basement, hoping that they won't start gnawing at each other and barking at each other. But once they finally come out, these dogs, they've been totally perverted and they've chewed each other up and stuff like that. So that image was interesting to me because not really the image itself, but I just came to think how it resonated with all of those people barking in Lynch's films, and all of those dogs barking off screen, and those animalistic sound designs that he's used, going back to his earliest short films, like The Grandmother, where the mother and the father, they walk on all fours and they bark like dogs, and when disciplining his son, because he's peed in his bed, right? The father forces his head down into the son's own urine, but while barking at him. So it's almost as if the father is punishing the dog or his son in a way that some people would try to discipline their dogs, but the father and the mother, in fact, are most similar to primal animals. Yeah. And it's heard on the soundtrack. And so we hear that recurringly through Lynch's work. When Jeffrey there's a sex scene with Jeffrey and Dorothy in Blue Velvet, where Alan Splett uses this slowed down sound, and we have some sort of some animalistic roars of lions, and he has this very, very interesting, intricate sound design that illustrates, I suppose, that there's a side in Jeffrey that he's always wanted to live out, and now finally it sort of it comes out. And because he's tried to keep it down for such a long time, and finally, when it gets out there in sort of a violent, a slightly perverted way. And we see that all the time. I mean, at the opening of Lost Highway, there's a dog barking outside the frame, and both of our main characters notice it, and not knowing who owns that dog. And we have characters in Wild at Heart barking like dogs. Right. Harry Stanson's character does that, and Jack Nance's character, Double-Eyed Spool, of course, barks while talking about his dog that might be Toto from The Wizard of Oz. And in that classic traffic sequence in Fire Walk With Me, we have the dog barking while we are hearing what Laura is perhaps trying to repress the most.
Right. And Black Dog Runs at Night, that
Yes.
song, Black Dog Runs at Night.
Yeah, and the
Very-
Black Dog Runs at Night, yes. So I don't know if Lynch and Frost and Lynch in particular, because I'm looking at all of Lynch's work, not just Twin Peaks. I don't know if he's ever meant anything very particular with that, or if he's just, like he's into electricity, he might just be into the sounds of animals,
Yeah.
or slowing down the sound of a human voice a few octaves in order to make it sound a little bit like an animal or a roar. I don't know that he has any specific interpretation or idea behind it, but he does that quite a lot. And even in the classic scene where Maddie is killed in episode 14,
Right.
Because of the use of slow motion sound in sort of a Sean Epsteinian fashion, that combination of real time and slow motion sound makes Bob Leland sound like an animal.
Mm-hmm.
So there is sort of an animalistic quality to the sound, and I just think that's interesting when considering Twin Peaks and The Return, because we have, actual scenes of characters barking at each other. We have the drunk in the new series, and of course we have Bobby and Mike barking at James in the jail cell and the pilot episode.
That's a great connection. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. Yeah.
I think that's a typical motif, and I just noticed. I'm not the first one to notice it, I'm sure, but I just found it interesting that a few of these very typical Lynchian motifs are there in a very prevalent way in the new series. According to Martha Nochimson, I think she argues that perhaps the most significant motif in Lynch's films, which is there from the onset, is vomit, right? Vomit and sickness. We have six figures getting sick, characters vomiting, and we have the words "look" and "sick" in capital letters on the screen. So it's as if there's a sickness that we need to notice, and that sickness that we need to notice and that needs to get out of the organism is such a strong motif in his films. In Eraserhead, Henry notices that Spike, you are sick, right? And vomits, and we have, or whatever it is that it does. And we, in the new series of Twin Peaks, characters, they vomit uncontrollably.
Yes.
And it is as if, so it's almost as if the sickness has been spreading. And perhaps there's almost an element of social commentary in that. So if there was a sickness underneath the beautiful surface or veneer in the original Twin Peaks, it's almost as if even the surface isn't that beautiful anymore.
Yeah.
It's been torn open, and now the sickness is just it's spread wildly in the new one. So people have these ugly rashes, or they vomit aggressively inside of cars, and children shoot guns, and there's all this crazy stuff happening. It's almost as if all of this sickness that's always been there now is just erupting into something. And I don't know if that's a social comment, but it certainly looks like it. And I think if that's not a Lynchian element, then that's perhaps a Frostian element. I could imagine Frost wanting to comment on the current situation in a way, and there's something so topical in this sort of anti or this gun control like topic, or some of the themes in it, even those subtle ones, they resonate, in an uncanny way with what's going on these days, I think.
It's
so.
true, yeah. I think about the sickness. I think about when you're sick, that means there's something inside of you that doesn't agree with you, and it needs to get out of you. So in some way, is it the interior? I thought they were going to play with this more in the series, that the splitting of Cooper, was it really splitting the good Cooper and the bad Cooper? Is there something about Cooper that he doesn't like, and it's manifesting in Mr. C? But I don't know if it really went that far, but I could kind of see, like, when you're sick, that it's something to do with you or something to do with inside of you that doesn't agree with you. So it's something, I don't know, I guess you can look at it that way. Is there is it ourselves that we need to reflect on ourselves to see, is there something wrong with us?
Whether the sickness is something that's always inherent in every human being, and it's something that all of us sort of need to deal with inside each and every one of us. It's sort of the dark side of the human being, or whatever, our shadow self, or if it's if that sickness could also be a sort of social sickness in a way. I wouldn't know, but it just seems that it's coming out, and it's and spreading, and so what the kind of Twin Peaks that we've returned to, if we can even call it a return, I think it's a Twin Peaks that is far less immediately likable. That is far less immediately wholesome than the original series.
Yeah.
And I think part of what people disliked about Fire Walk with Me was the sheer morbidity or the gruesomeness of that tale. I don't know how that tale could have been any different. I mean, it deals with the last 7 days of a young girl's life. So how could that be a cute tale of coffee? I mean, and it's not that. I mean, the original Twin Peaks was a cute tale, but I mean, of course, they need to discover that hidden illness before it can sort of ever get out of the organism, or the social organism, as it were. And Fire Walk with Me, in that one, we're directly into the heart of darkness, and it's as if we just continued that movement. So the new series, while at times very, very humoristic and lighthearted, it certainly seems very dark to me.
Yes.
So I don't know how exactly to analyze the ending of it, to interpret that ending. So
I think none of us do. I don't think any of us know how to do that.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I mean, I think
and I know that people. Yeah, I know people argue that the final, some articles have written that the final dossier finally explains that ending. And I read those articles. I did that even though I didn't want any spoilers. You know, I couldn't help myself. So I read that before I listened to the audiobook version. And I've only listened to the audiobook version already because I haven't yet gotten hold of my physical book yet. I'm still waiting for the Danish Postal Service to live up to my expectations, and deliver that Mark Frost goodie for me. But when I read that article, I thought, well, no, that doesn't. What Frost says in the final dossier, I don't think it in a definite way it explains the ending.
I don't think so. I agree.
So I don't see it that way. I wouldn't want it to be explained.
Right.
Yeah, I'm on the fence. Me and Ben were just talking about the ending of the book before we called you, and you know, I like the ambiguity of the show, giving us what we project, what we want. But that book, to me, kind of says, the way I read it, it feels like you're getting a report from Preston that definitely she's saying, I looked in the history of Twin Peaks, and now Laura didn't die. She went missing. And history has been... people are forgetting things. And she's like, I'm starting to forget. Thank God I'm writing this down. Yeah. And maybe my other theory about this right now, it will change, but what if this is Judy? What if Laura did die, but there's a force that's changing the way people think and perceive what happened? I don't know. I don't know. I'm like, but it's hard to wrap my head around.
I think that's a good theory, and you know, it comes back to sort of a very basic question to me, which is we can never equate, and nor should we ever try to equate the authorial voice with the voice of a narrator. in a story. And I mean, because a narrative, a narrator or an embedded narrator or whatever we call somebody, saying something in a story or trying to write down documents or trying to interpret documents, those sort of narrative agencies in a story, they can never be equated with the author. They might be unreliable. They might not necessarily because they try to lie, but they might not necessarily know everything.
Yeah.
They might have been misled or
misinterpreted.
Have vague memories and stuff. Yeah, and so there are all these different possibilities that come into play. And I think I haven't talked with Frost about the dossier. I'm hoping that we'll be talking about the final dossier too, like we talked about the secret history.
Yeah.
But I remember when talking with him about the secret history, that he argued that it was very much about different narrative agents and shifting points of view and constantly having to question whether a narrative agent was a reliable source.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I remember him saying that sort of also played into our time in a very neat way, a time where the word fact has become debated, and we're debating whether there are
fake news.
So
I agree. So next month, you have an article in Blue Rose magazine. Can you give us a little preview of that? That'll be, I think, issue 4. Can you give us a little taste of what you wrote in that article?
Well, yes, I have in a way already indicated a few things because I'm launching a video essay next week, and then the Blue Rose magazine article, and they both of them deal with, although in different ways, they deal with sampling and remixing and repetitions as sort of an element that I've been discussing and analyzing in different Danish articles, and the one in Blue Rose deals solely with the sound design and the use of sampling musically and sonically in the new series. And then the video essay is sort of a more wildly digressive thing where I look at the different ways in which the new series interacts with the original series, with Lynch's filmography, and with film history, and how it sort of ventures into a dialogue with these things. And by use of sort of a very vivid collage kind of technique, it sort of creates sort of a new and interesting piece of work. Mm-hmm. So I argue it's not just sort of an intertextual collage in sort of a postmodern fashion, but that it argues that in a way all of life is a cycle, and sort of a perpetual cycle of repetition and transformation, and that is illustrated also in the way in which it employs elements from the original series. It re-employs parts from Fire Walk With Me, and it re-employs motifs and repurposes stuff from other films into sort of this new statement on, I suppose, life as a cycle. We are afraid to let go, and yet we are faced here with the inevitability of transformation. So things cannot stay fixed. Life is a living, breathing organism, and everything will change. That's sort of a natural fact. And the same goes with Twin Peaks. The town will change. The characters will change. Actors, unfortunately, tragically die, and so do characters in the show. And there's something very touching.
Yeah, and Cooper says that it's like things will have to. I think he's actually saying it to Hawk. Things will have to change and stuff. And it's like, what is that about? And stuff. Things will change.
Laura doesn't die. That's the change.
I don't know.
She goes missing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I've because somebody called it, and I'm sort of playing with that notion. They described it as a touching meditation on death. I kind of like that concept, but But then I came to thinking of the log lady's great conversation with Hawk, and how that resonates with the ending of The Elephant Man, where she says that nothing ever truly dies, right? I mean, things change.
Yeah.
So stuff changes into something else, and then it transforms, and it might seemingly repeat itself as if it were just a perpetual cycle. But that's all of life. I mean, things grow, they change, they seemingly die, but then they change into something else. So in a way, that's the cycle of life. And I'm not. I don't know that much about transcendentalism, neither American transcendentalism nor transcendental meditation. But I suppose there is almost an oriental or transcendental point to that. We should embrace life as a cycle of repetition and change, and accept that things will change into something else, continue to grow, die, and then change into something else. And in the same way, well, perhaps Laura doesn't die. We don't know. But what does it actually mean if ever he were to actually physically, in a sort of science fiction-like way, have been able to remove her, and in that sense avoid her or prevent her from being killed? Does that mean that history as such changes? I find that hard to believe. I don't think that that's the point, and I must admit that I suppose I'm also reluctant to see that, because I think of that as sort of a very simplistic understanding of life, that you could actually know physically, just go back and change the course of things. I mean, even if you were to do that, the repercussions of whatever changes you make are the potential consequences or implications are impossible to figure out. And so we might find out that, well, even if it did in fact prevent her from dying, and that's an actual fact that happened, right, then what would happen then? We don't know. And it's sort of implied, right, that or it's said that perhaps she didn't die, and we don't know if she didn't, because you've sort of been into that yourself. But Leland's life certainly didn't become any less tragic, and neither did Sarah's. So, and we don't know that Laura's life was any less tragic. So, what has he ever, if he's been able to prevent her from anything, what has he actually really been able to prevent her from?
Right.
Is it the physical abuse? Because it seems that tragedy is this.
We lost you.
But it seems the consequences are equally tragic, apparently. And so that's I suppose what I meant by this cycle of repetition and transformation. So things might look slightly different, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, of course, Becky is not Shelley, but Becky is repeating patterns that her mother has repeated from her own, from her own childhood, where her parents went through a similar thing, right? That she then went through with Leo, that Becky then went through at a later stage. And it seems as if that sounds very Freudian, that we are caught inside patterns that we can't escape from, and it's not necessarily that negative. But I just think that we're not at a place, or we're not in a position where we can actually tell the potential consequences or repercussions of those kind of cosmic changes. All we know is that there are things that will repeat themselves, and there are things that will transform. And I think we see a lot of stuff in the new series that uncannily they seem similar to what we've seen before. It's not quite the same, but it's very similar. And it's like when the giant in the original series says it's happening again, and then Maddie dies, and it's that to me was interesting because, well, it's a new person who's being killed. So in that sense, a killing is happening again.
Yes.
But I think it's interesting that he uses the pronoun "it." It is happening again, because that sentence to me tells us that that's exactly what it is. It's a replay. It's a reenactment of the same situation. It might as well have been Laura's tragedy replayed. And so, in a sense, that's what we're seeing also in the new series. So,
definitely,
James now is on the stage with 2 new women, but the situation is totally the same, and the recording, by golly, is sampled. It's not even, they don't even use a new recording, and they don't even try to make it sound as if he's actually singing on stage. We can clearly hear that this is not played live. I mean, you hear percussion and bass and stuff like that, instruments that aren't even there in the physical room. And people react to the music in a way that seems strangely unreal, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, when people reacted to the No Stars, what a great track that is, but when people reacted to No Stars and they said, oh, you can hear Rebecca Del Rio's voice, it's been tampered with, and it's clearly not her live voice. I was kind of taken aback by people saying that, because I don't think it's ever meant for us to think that she's singing that live. It's so clearly not meant for us to think that. I mean, it takes me back to Mulholland Drive and that No Hay Banda scene, right, at Club Silencio, where she falls over while seemingly singing Roy Orbison's song, right? So it's almost as if that's, you can go through Lynch's work and you can see all of these different things that just continue to echo on, or it's almost like he's dropped sort of a small stone in the water, and you can see all these different things in the water, and it has this kind of ripple effect. So we have scenes that repeat themselves with slight variations throughout all of his work, and if Twin Peaks: The Return is anything, I think it's very much more than it is a return. I think it's a story about life as a cyclical process, life in Twin Peaks and outside of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, we're getting back into, I think next month we're going to get back into David Lynch shorts. And I wondered, do you have a favorite David Lynch short?
I like many of the short films. I think of the early short films, my favorite is The Grandmother. It's the lengthiest one, of course, but The Alphabet is pretty intense too. But The Grandmother, I think, is the sound in it is so great. I absolutely love that film.
Yeah,
so I think I'd have to go with that one.
Yeah.
I like his use of colors in the early films. I like his combination of chiaroscuro, almost sort of an expressionistic black and white, with elements of very very clear contrast colors like sharp red and stuff like that. So there are many contrasts visually in these images. There are some very expressive qualities, and his combination of almost crude animation, stop motion and stuff like that, and then live action, I think functions brilliantly. And I think in a way, I don't remember, I think it was Lev Manowitz who once wrote that the digital camera can allow you to use much more so than the greater cameras that you used to make great classic cinema with, right? The digital camera can allow you to use your camera much more so like a writer would use his pen or a painter his paintbrush, because with the digital camera and with digital editing, you can literally take the camera everywhere, and you can digitally manipulate every every shot in totally in the way that you want it to be.
Yeah.
And what Sabrina Sutherland, she said to me, is that David Lynch has literally gone. He's dissected every shot, every frame even of the new series, going back to the Blu-ray box when that was released in 2014, I suppose it was. That was when he started doing those deleted scenes. That was when he started finding all of the different scenes and shots that he wanted to reuse in the new series. And from that point on, his ideas of a plot started to develop. And then, of course, Mark Frost and Lynch, they had a lot of conversations, often via Skype, and through those conversations, they created a plot. But already in an early stage, he found out he wanted these shots and these scenes and these sounds sampled and reused or superimposed or digitally manipulated in the new series.
Yeah.
And if you see some of these shots in the new series, perhaps in a way, some of the digital effects might seem slightly crude or almost handheld. But to me, that goes back to Lynch's short films.
Yeah.
It's almost the shots have sort of a very painterly quality, and you can see how literally he's had ideas with each and every color and each and every element, and digital editing and digital shooting. Those things allow him to manipulate the image and the sounds in a way that he would with his paintings and his music. So
isn't that something?
It doesn't look like a grandmother, but but in a way,
right. I mean, it's really interesting to see how he's played with the effects and he's played with sound. And I think about the sound, he's done some very interesting things with the sound. And like at some points, it seems like he's had hidden messages, or I don't know if he's just playing around with the sound. But like, there's a point where you're in the convenience store, above the convenience store, a couple times, and you have this just like really quick, speedy sound or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, but I'm like trying to figure it out. I was trying to make sense of it, so I would like reverse it and change the pitch. And then you start hearing what I think I hear David Lynch talking, and it's like he would say like, "Mike, back up, Mike, back up." And I'm thinking to myself, was he just recording random stuff and he just wanted to mess with the sound?
Are you directing? And
Yeah, he's directing, but he must have taken those elements of sound and said, "Hey, I'll just reverse it and change the pitch, and nobody will know. It'll just be organic sounds." But it's I'm very fascinated by it. I don't think it's a hidden message. I think it's him playing with sound.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember somebody saying that when we think of David Lynch, we should go back to the Dadaist idea or the notion of the appreciation of the image as image, and that idea I think goes for his sound work too. And actually, I think his films are not Dadaistic at all, but there is a Dadaist element to what he's doing. It was also the Dadaists who they were also the ones to perhaps the first ones to create the idea of cut up and collage and sampling in the early avant-garde film Dadaists. And they did sort of cut up poetry and stuff like that in a slightly nonsensical way. But I think first and foremost, that's at least what Sabrina Sutherland says, and I would tend to agree with her without knowing it. But first and foremost, Lynch is he is an artist who experiments with textures and with sounds and with images and with colors, and he might not always he has a definite idea as to what he would like something to look and sound like. He might not always know the entire painting to begin with, and he's often described it as if he sort of sees pieces, one piece at a time, and then those fragments, they turn into something. And I like that idea. I think he experiments with manipulating sounds, and if suddenly it's like he might hear his own child crying, and then, well, why not try to sample that? Yes, and then he does that in the alphabet, right?
Yes.
And in the same way, I suppose you could imagine him like they wanted to make that sound in I think I've talked about that before, but they wanted to make that sound in the classroom in the pilot episode of Twin Peaks where Laura isn't there, and we cut down to that image of the empty chair, and they wanted to have sort of a hollow sound, and Lynch didn't know how to record that sound, so he simply mouthed that sound, like saying something akin to.
Isn't that funny?
Like, and they recorded it in the RAM, and they looped it because he couldn't sustain that sound for that long. But I mean, I think he thinks of, I don't know, I'm not inside of his head, but it seems to me that all of his different works, they are not necessarily part of the same narrative universe as some people tend to think. I think that they are different stories, but they're all part of one body of work. They're all part of him experimenting with form. Remember, we are dealing with the human form.
Nice. That's great.
I think he said that experimentation with texture, with sound, with colors, and with images. I think that comes before anything else in his work. But then it's lovely that his work is that, and then a narrative. Because I mean, you could enjoy the opening of part 3, you could enjoy that in an art museum, in an art gallery, and it would be sort of an art installation in itself.
Yes.
But now, and you could do the same with that lengthy 20-minute montage from part 8. That could be an art installation in itself. But now it becomes this strange, excessive element inside of a narrative story that's not altogether causal, that's not classically linear, but there is a definite story, and there are some clear-cut themes, and there is a plot and some characters we can immerse ourselves in and engage with, and then we have these sort of elements that punctuate that story and that function as small art installations or experiments within that story. And I think that I like that because that, in a way, that also, that takes art outside of the gallery and into the public, where it should be. Because in the art galleries, only people who already know that they want that go there. And
that's a great point. That's a really great point.
He's forcing these installations into primetime television and onto our computer screens when we least expect it. And some people react with anger and frustration, but hey.
That's what art is.
Lars von Trier has said a lot of stupid things, but he said one thing that I quite like, which is that film should be like a stone in the shoe. They needn't always, cater to your immediate needs. And they needn't necessarily appease you, but they need to make you feel something.
Yeah.
And so even if you're frustrated by Twin Peaks, it does something to you. And
definitely,
I suppose Lynch would be happy with that.
Yeah, totally.
Definitely. So before we go, next year you've got a book coming out, The Art of Paradox. Can you share a little bit about that? How is that going?
Well, it's going well. I've acquired a lot of photos for it. It'll have a new number of private photos from people who collaborated with Lynch. But not Richard Beamer this time, and there are reasons for that. I've had some talks with Richard Beamer. He is perhaps making a book of himself.
I hope so. I want a coffee. I want a coffee book.
I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but
we've mentioned the show. I've reached out to his people, and he's talked to me as well about possibly doing something. This was a while ago, so we've already mentioned it on the show. Yeah. Yeah,
and I hope he does because he's so great. His images are so magnificent. But so it'll have some other kinds of private images, but I've interviewed like 100 different people from his different productions, going back to his short films and The Razorhead, and through Elephant Man, June, Blue Velvet, and all of the smaller productions too, like Hotel Room and On the Air, and Industrial Symphony No. 1, and
that's awesome.
Whatever kinds of productions you could figure out. So not all of there are some names that, well, naturally, I would have wanted to speak with Laura Dern. That's not been possible for me. And Lynch, although he's given me his blessings and he's actually written some very nice words, he doesn't want to be interviewed for the book, and I can see why that's how it is. But I've interviewed numerous people who've worked with him, from Mark Frost and Barry Gifford through Mary Sweeney and Jack Fisk and Fred Elms and a lot of people doing Dunham and all of those.
That's exciting. Yeah. People.
And so, all of these different interviews are new elements to what was essentially an analytical book. The original Danish book is just an analytical book of 200 pages in which the first part of it is sort of a chronological breakdown of his career, focusing on sort of the production process and the reception of his different works. And then the second part of the book analyzes different what I call paradoxes or irreducible ambiguities on different levels, like how beauty and ugliness are two sides to the same coin, and how his films are both narrative and non-narrative at the same time. How in a way we want to see his films as puzzles, and we want to piece them together, yet at the same time we must acknowledge that we can't.
Yes.
But those two things, they kind of push and pull recurringly. So we constantly want to find out, what did the ending mean, although it might not have meant anything in one definite thing, and we might never really find that answer. We'll continue looking for it. And how he combines genre fiction with autonomous non-genre fiction. And so those are different, what I call, you suppose you can give them many different names, but I call them paradoxes. And so that's the analytical part of the book. And so these things are basically, I've taken that as the foundation of the new book, and then I've just rewritten all of that and changed stuff and added a lot of stuff. And then I've added interview stuff where I think it fits. So it's sort of interspersed interview elements with a run-through of his work and an analysis of these different paradoxes. So that's the basic gist of it. I mean, it's a way to engage with his work and a way to explain the kind of ambivalent feelings that his films have always produced in me, and I like that ambivalence. I like that ambiguity. It sits well with me. I don't think I've ever really needed fully to understand everything in his work. But at the same time, I try to. Right. So that's what that book is about. But at the same time, I'm finishing another book together with a Danish sound designer about sound design, which also naturally includes something about David Lynch. So there'll be 2 Lynch-related books next year. One only on sound, where Lynch is a part of it, and then one which is only about David Lynch. But of course, that book will also deal with sound. I mean, that will deal with all the different elements in his work. Or not all the different elements, but all of the different aspects that go into making a film, at least.
Yeah,
of course, I can't thematically go through everything. I mean,
definitely, it's so exciting. You've got so many things you're working on. It's great.
You're a madman.
I'm definitely when it's available for pre-order, I'm gonna get The Art of Paradox.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
It sounds really good. I mean, it's so exciting to all the people you got to talk to, and I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I hope it will be great. And then Of course, Joel and I are still talking, but we both of us have watched Hill Street Blues from beginning to end, and we've sort of had few talks these last couple of months, and then I read his different books, and now finally we sort of have an agreement that the next phase, the next step for us to go further with our Mark Frost idea would be upon having read the final dossier, because it certainly does seem like that's a potential missing link.
Yeah.
So, but that's sort of a little further into the future, it seems. And surprisingly, I think, I mean, while Lynch is so difficult he doesn't really want to talk that much about his art, and he's secretive in a way. Mark Frost is very engaging. He readily talks about his art, but at the same time, it's difficult to, very clearly pinpoint the Frostian trademark. I think he's more difficult in a way to pin down, and I don't mean that Lynch is easy to pin down, but it's as if you can more readily get a feeling that you sort of, okay, this is the Lynchian trademark, so these are the Lynchian signatures. Whereas it seems Mark Frost is he'll talk more and he'll give you more information. He's very generous that way, but he seems more not chameleon-like, but he seems as if his work is less stringently uniform, and that makes for a slightly more difficult project, I think.
Yeah.
But luckily, I have Joe Baco to he'll figure everything out, and
Well, I look forward to that too. The Mark Frost book. I can't wait to read that too. I mean, I know that's in the early stages still, the Mark Frost book, but I can't wait to read that as well. Well, Andreas, I think we're out of time, but man, I am so excited all the stuff you're working on. I actually was looking for the Blue Rose magazine article, and I was going through my Blue Rose. It's like, how come I can't find Andreas's article? And it's like, oh, it's the upcoming December issue, so I can't wait to read that.
I'm so happy they've done the Blue Rose magazine. I mean, how lovely is it that John Thorne has and Scott Reiner, they're doing that. I mean,
it is really special. I mean, I thought we'd never get like a Wrapped in Plastic Again magazine, but it's almost like it's the child of Wrapped in Plastic.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm so happy that they're doing.
It's great that we have people like in the fan community like you doing podcasts and people writing magazines and stuff like that. It'll it'll function as sort of a collective hive mind or a collective historical database in a way, and also sort of it's also as one organism we try to comprehend and understand this immense work of art, and so there's an immense sense of communion, I think, and collaboration in the Twin Peaks environment that I'm happy to see, and a very high degree of productivity, I think.
Definitely, it's something else. Well, Andreas, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I hope we can have you on again soon.
Yeah.
And especially when your book comes out, we got to have you on again to talk about your books and all the stuff you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Andreas, for being on today's show. What a fountain of information.
Yeah, I don't. When does this guy have time to do all he's working on? He's working on books, he's got articles, he's working on videos, he's got everything.
Ben, he's putting us to shame.
He is.
He does it all. Smart guy.
Yes.
So smart. And I could listen to him talk, and this is a great Thanksgiving week show because I am full from just hearing all his knowledge. I can just see words coming out of my ears of all the stuff he talks about. It's
he does
very
make me look.
fascinating.
Looking at his article from 25 years later site, it made me think, I got to go back and look at grandmother there. Like, the sounds in grandmother, the barking parents and stuff. And we're going to cover that soon. But maybe this is a good time to start to look at it and maybe see what Andreas had to say about it.
So if everybody at home, you're following with us, this is going to kind of be like a book club for the next couple weeks. It's more like a video club. We're going to be talking about rabbits, Dumbland, the alphabet, grandmother. So if you go ahead, look up those videos. They're all on YouTube by now.
Or you can find it. They have the shorts.
Green Lion Box, right, has a lot of these.
Yeah, but of course, in Eraserhead, the Blu-ray one has the shorts.
Yeah.
And so I also had gotten the shorts for the DVD version when DavidLynch.com was selling it. So there's a lot of different ways to get the shorts. Yeah,
so I recommend get on top of it, watch these. And we're going to be discussing them for the remainder of the year. Okay, so it's going to be like Oprah's book club. It's going to be Ben and Bryan's David Lynch video club. So just do yourself a favor, watch these because I think you're really going to appreciate it more when listening to our show if you've seen them.
Right.
And they're not long. It's not going to take up much of your time.
I think Grandmother's the longest one is about a half hour. The other ones are a lot shorter than that even.
I think Rabbits reaches 40 minutes.
Oh, that's true because there's episodes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's like 9 episodes. So,
But they go by so quick and they're so entertaining and so bizarre and I love them and I can't wait to talk about them. So please do that. And while you're waiting for next week's show, you can like us on Facebook at Twin Peaks Unwrapped. We're really kicking butt there. We're on Twitter, Ben.
And Twin Peaks Unwrapped.
Yep. You can email us at twinpeaksunwrapped@gmail.com with your comments, theories, or hey, you have an idea for a show for 2018, by all means, send us an email. And you can find us on Google Play, Stitcher, and iTunes. You can leave us a 5-star review, and you can write a nice little comment, and that will keep us in the zeitgeist of podcasts.
Right. Keep our community growing.
Yeah.
Yes.
One more thing.
One more.
This week, we have Black Friday. Black Friday sales on TeePublic. Please visit our store. The link is in the our show notes. And on Monday, Cyber Monday, there's going to be a store-wide sale on TeePublic. I'm bringing up all the stuff we took away. I found boxes of it. I dusted it off.
So are you saying you got the Mr. C over-the-top shirt again?
That's going to be back up there. The Dougie shirt's going to be back up there. So everything that we ran out of, or I thought we ran out of, will be back for a limited time only just for this Christmas season.
And this really does help support the podcast. This is a way that, it can bring in some money to pay for our bills. So, that really helps. Thank you to everybody. Weekly I'm seeing people buy these shirts, and it's a wonderful thing, and we really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And that's all we ask to support the show.
Yeah.
And like I said, you could buy a shirt, but we have hoodies.
Oh, yeah.
You can
or mugs.
Or mugs, or a cell phone case, or a sticker. And so you can get a multitude of different things with our logo on it or whatever. So
awesome.
Enjoy that, and we'll be back next week.
See you in the trees.
The breeze, I'll see you in own trees.